Welcome everyone to my updated Tighnari guide. Over these last few patches of Fontaine, Tighnari has received some great buffs, so in this video we're gonna go over them, including the old but still great options he has. As usual, we'll go over all things you need to know when building and playing Tighnari. Be sure to use the chapters as you see fit, and with that, let's get into the guide, starting off with Tighnari's kit. So Tighnari is a main DPS and his main source of damage is his charge attacks. Much like Ganyu, the charge attacks I'm talking about is not the normal charge attacks everyone has, but a special charge attack you get if you continue to aim. On their own, these attacks take quite some time to charge, but his skill solves this. His skill creates a fog that draws the attention of enemies, making him possible to play without a shielder. But most importantly, his skill makes firing his special charge attacks much faster than before. It's near instant, but you'll know when to fire his charge attacks when you see the end of his bow light up like a flower, or you wait about 2 seconds. With his skill, you can fire 3 of his fast charge attacks as indicated by the orbs to his left. Finally comes his burst, which is very straightforward. It's simply a burst that fires multiple arrows, dealing good damage. For his Ascension talents, they increase his EM when firing a charge shot and make EM a stat that directly buffs his charge attacks and burst. So EM is a good stat to have, but we'll get more into this in the artifact section. When leveling Tighnari's abilities, be sure to level his normal attacks since leveling them will increase his charge attack damage. Then prioritize leveling his burst, and you can ignore his skill. All leveling his skill does is increase the damage of the little ball Tighnari throws. It's not at all important, so I have no idea why I leveled it, but no, you don't need to. Also, if possible, try to level Tighnari to level 90 since that will increase his spread damage significantly, which is one of his best teams, but more on this later. With that covered, let's now talk about artifacts since they are very important, but can get pretty confusing. Real quick, some great early game artifacts to use as a set or combine are Resolution of Sojourner, Berserker, Instructor, Braveheart, and Martial Artist, which perfectly pairs with Tighnari's kit. For mid or endgame artifacts, you have 2 options to go with. The first is to equip 4 Deepwood on Tighnari. 4 Deepwood is a must-have because of the Dendro resistance it applies on enemies, of which is massive. Think of it as the Dendro version of 4 Viridescent. We all know how strong Viridescent is and how it's a big damage boost to the element it shreds. The same is the case for 4 Deepwood. Without Deepwood, Tighnari's damage will be so low, you absolutely need to use it. Now the other option is to not give 4 Deepwood to Tighnari, but another unit, namely a support. This is done so Tighnari can still benefit from the Dendro resistance shred, while having another artifact set that further increases his damage. This is the option I personally use, and the artifact sets you can use is for Wanderer's Troop. This is the strongest set since it gives Tighnari a massive 35% increase to his charge shots, as well as a little EM on the side for more charge shots and burst damage. A close second is 4 Gilded Dreams, which gives EM and attack based on the elements of Tighnari's teammates. These 2 stats are needed for Tighnari, so it's also a great set to equip. Next is Mehashose Hunter. Now the thing about this set is that it's actually really good. It's competitive with 4 Gilded Dreams for the second best set, but the thing about it is that it's at its best if you have Farina. If you have Farina and you pair her with Tighnari, the set becomes very good. Otherwise, it's actually better to just use the other 2 sets mentioned. So I'm gonna rank it at 3rd. It's a very strong set, but very situational as well. Then comes mixing in 2 sets of EM, attack, Dendro damage bonus, or charge attack bonus. And then last, but certainly least, 4 Bolide. Despite its massive increase to charge attacks, the set doesn't fare well on Tighnari, so I'd recommend to not use this set unless you're low on resources and have no other options. For specific main stats, use a Dendro damage goblet, a crit rate or a crit damage circlet, and finally either an EM or attack sands. Though I personally lean more so to EM since we've gone over how it's an important stat on Tighnari, how it increases his personal damage a bit, as well as his reaction damage. The thing about the attack sense is that the attack sense outputs damage that is very close to EM, so the difference really isn't massive enough for me to say that EM is absolutely needed. Attack is very close to EM, so with this, I'd say to use whichever artifact has the better substats. Speaking of substats, aim for both crits, attack, and EM, and also try to balance the 2 out. So if you have a lot of EM, try to get more attack, and vice versa. For energy recharge, I'd say to get about 110, unless he's the sole Dendro unit. If he is the sole unit, I'd recommend then around 140. But getting 140 can be a headache and can really take away from his DPS, so it's better to just pair Tighnari with a second Dendro unit, or to give some of your units Favonius weapons. Moving on to weapons, there has been a few new options for Tighnari, of which are actually quite good. But quickly going over the early game options, the bows to use are the Raven Bow, the Sharpshooter's Oath, the Messenger, and the Slingshot, which at R5 is actually a surprisingly strong bow. Though it is a 3-star, at R5 it essentially turns into a 4-star. Back with endgame, the weapons to use on Tighnari are weapons that have crit, EM, or attack as their substats or passives. Of course, there are many bows that fit this criteria, but some notable ones are his signature bow, the Hunter's Path. This bow is tailor-made for him, so naturally it deals the most damage, but there's still other great options to use. For example, Linny's signature weapon, the Thundering Pulse, both of which give great crit damage, which is always nice, the Skyward Harp for both crit rate and crit damage, and finally the Amos bow, which is an amazing free-to-play option. This bow fits perfectly with Tighnari and is definitely the bow to use if you have it. For 4 stars, the great news is that most of Tighnari's best weapons are actually craftable. At the top is the old but effective prototype Crescent. At R1 it's decent, but at R5 it becomes very strong because of the huge attack it gives. It actually beats out some of the 5-star bows, but at the caveat of having to shoot enemies in their weak spot. A weaker but less constrained bow is the Hamayumi. At R5 this bow can output very similar damage to that of the Crescent, but also has a constraint where the user deals the most damage if their burst is ready. This actually fits really well with Tighnari, but you are going to have to make sure Tighnari has his burst ready when his rotation starts. Last is the recently released Song of Stillness. It follows the same pattern where the bow deals less damage at a less constrained passive. If you'll be using this bow, be sure to use a healer. Aside from these weapons, there are many gacha or free event bows that you can make use of, but I recommend to use the craftable bows instead. The gacha and event bows are decent options, but not as strong as the craftable bows, so it's better to just go with them instead. Now let's delve into Tighnari's Constellations, and the thing about them is that they're actually not that good. They don't change Tighnari in any significant way, they more so just increase his damage. Given this, his Constellations are not important, but here are his best ones. The first is his C1, which adds 15% crit rate to his charge attacks. This will make him more consistent, make him easier to build, and may allow you to add more crit damage on him. But remember to still have a high enough crit rate for his burst. C4 increases the entire team's EM by 120. This constellation is good since it not only increases Tighnari's damage, but the entire team's damage. So if you have this constellation, it's a nice one to have. And to no surprise, his C6. It'll shorten the time in which you have to wait for his special charge shots, and it'll add one more arrow to his charge attacks when you fire them. This constellation will increase his DPS quite a bit, but it also has the negative effects of lessening his field time even further. Already as a DPS, Tighnari has little time on the field, so to make it even less doesn't solve this problem. But at the very least, it'll allow for your second DPS or sub DPS that you're playing with Tighnari to have more time on the field. Speaking of DPS, it's about time we talk about Tighnari's teams and the changes they've got. So when it comes to Tighnari's teams, they're basically always Quicken teams. Though I have a team that isn't Quicken, which I'll mention in the end, I need to mention Quicken teams because they are his best teams. Hyper Bloom and really any other Dendro reaction doesn't work great with Tighnari. It's feasible but not ideal, whereas Quicken caters perfectly to Tighnari, given the way he plays in, since Tighnari's kit does want EM. The nice thing is that some Electro units fit nicely with Tighnari's Quicken teams, like Yae Miko. Yae is currently getting a rerun right now, and if you're able to get her, she is one of the best teammates for Tighnari. Yae is able to apply tons of Electro to enemies, making Quicken easy to perform, and her field time fits well with Tighnari's lack of field time. I've been mentioning Tighnari's low field time, which stems from his reliance on his skill. While it's on cooldown, there's this gap of time which needs to be used by someone, and a great candidate for that someone is Yae. In that time, she can deal her damage, of which is very high, and will either significantly increase the team's damage or be a great person to maintain it. Next to Yae, I highly recommend to play Fischl. Official has very high sub DPS damage, but she will also solve Yai's biggest issue, that being her energy. As for a more free-to-play version of this team, you can use a team like this. Moving on to the second team, again it's a quicken team, but this time instead of Yai, Raiden is the second DPS. I personally prefer this team over the first, since to me it feels better to play. Raiden's burst duration fits almost perfectly with Tighnari's downtime, and in the downtime you're battering the team while dealing high damage with Raiden's burst. Though this team really doesn't need battering, this team synergizes really well, it's very strong and very satisfying to use. Now for the new team, it is a quick bloom team featuring Furina. So we all know how great a buffer Furina is, and she's likewise the same for Tighnari. The only problem is that Tighnari wants to be played in quicken teams, which Furina gets in the way of because of her Hydra presence. So to continue playing these two together and have Tighnari deal increased damage, you can play a quick bloom team where both quicken and hyper bloom occurs. And I gotta say, this team surprised me. It deals really good damage since everyone's damage is increased thanks to Furina, and you're dealing hyper bloom damage on top of quicken. When it comes to damage, this team has it and then some, but it must be said that this team is more vulnerable than the others. This is primarily because of Furina and how with Furina's inclusion comes the need of a good team-wide healer. So if you have Baiju or Kokomi, this team is much better since the team will be far less likely to die and you'll actually gain more of Furina's buffs. Well everyone, this is my Tighnari guide. I hope I helped you in understanding how to build Tighnari, and if I did, please consider liking and subscribing. If any of you have any further comments or questions about Tighnari, be sure to let me know them in the comments and I'll be happy to reply back to you. With that, thank you all for watching, take care, and thank you all for watching once again.